In the early morning of December 7, 1941, the quiet waves of Pearl Harbor in Hawaii shimmered under the rising sun. The American naval base, home to the Pacific Fleet, seemed peaceful and secure. Sailors went about their daily routines, unaware that within minutes, the sky would darken with Japanese warplanes that would change the course of world history. The attack on Pearl Harbor was not just a military strike, it was a moment that ignited America's entry into World War II, forever altering the global balance of power. To understand why Japan launched this surprise assault, one must go back to the political and economic tensions that had been simmering between the United States and Japan for years. Japan, during the early 20th century, was rapidly transforming into a major imperial power. It had already invaded Manchuria in 1931 and had launched a full-scale war against China in 1937. These actions were part of Japan's grand ambition to dominate East Asia and secure vital resources such as oil, rubber, and steel. The Japanese military government believed that expansion was necessary for survival, especially after Western colonial powers had divided much of Asia among themselves. The United States, however, saw Japan's aggression as a threat to its interests and the stability of the Pacific region. As Japan pushed deeper into China, committing atrocities such as the Nanjing Massacre, American public opinion turned sharply against it. The U.S. government, led by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, imposed a series of economic sanctions on Japan. These included restrictions on exports of oil, steel, and other materials vital to Japan's war machine. In 1940, Japan signed the Tripartite Pact with Germany and Italy, officially joining the Axis powers. This alliance made it clear that Japan's ambitions were aligned with those of Hitler's Germany, which was already ravaging Europe. The sanctions hit Japan hard, as nearly 80% of its oil came from the United States. Without access to oil, Japan's navy and air force would be crippled within months. Facing economic strangulation, Japan had to make a critical choice: either negotiate with the United States or seize the resources it needed by force. In July 1941, Japan occupied French Indochina, modern-day Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, further alarming Washington. In response, the U.S. froze all Japanese assets in America and cut off oil supplies completely. Japanese leaders, led by Prime Minister Hideki Tojo and Emperor Hirohito, began to plan a bold move. They knew that a prolonged war with the United States would be risky, but they hoped to deliver a knockout blow that would destroy America's Pacific Fleet, forcing the U.S. to negotiate peace on Japan's terms. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the commander-in-chief of the Japanese Navy, was the architect of the attack plan. Ironically, Yamamoto himself had studied in the United States and admired its industrial and military capabilities. Yet he also understood. As the smoke cleared over Pearl Harbor, the stunned American nation began to comprehend the enormity of what had happened. The Pacific Fleet, the pride of the U.S. Navy, lay crippled in its own harbor, and the sense of invincibility that had surrounded America was shattered overnight. Yet amid the devastation, a powerful sense of unity and determination arose. The attack had achieved what no amount of political speeches or propaganda could: it had united the American people with a single, unbreakable purpose. Within hours of Roosevelt's declaration of war, enlistment centers across the country were flooded. Young men from every state lined up to join the military, while families hung flags in their windows and vowed to contribute to the war effort in any way they could. Factories that had been producing cars, refrigerators, and household goods were quickly converted to make tanks, planes, and munitions. The vast industrial power of the United States was mobilized at lightning speed. Women stepped into roles they had never held before, building aircraft, welding ships, and assembling weapons. Rosie the Riveter, the cultural symbol of women workers, became an icon of strength and patriotism. The government established agencies to coordinate production and ration resources. The entire nation, from farmers to scientists, was now part of the war machine. America was no longer an observer of the global conflict, it was the arsenal of democracy. But even as the American war machine began to gear up, the situation in the Pacific looked grim. In the weeks following Pearl Harbor, Japan struck with stunning speed across the region. The Philippines, Guam, Wake Island, Hong Kong, and Malaya all came under attack. Japanese forces moved like a tidal wave, sweeping aside resistance. In the Philippines, American and Filipino troops fought valiantly under General Douglas MacArthur, but they were outnumbered and undersupplied. By early 1942, they were forced onto the Bataan Peninsula, where they endured months of brutal fighting before being captured in what became the infamous Bataan Death March. Thousands of prisoners died on that forced journey through disease, exhaustion, and cruelty. Meanwhile, Japan's navy seemed unstoppable. Its aircraft carriers and battleships dominated the Pacific, and its pilots, many of them veterans of the war in China, were highly skilled. American morale, however, did not collapse. Instead, outrage over Pearl Harbor fueled a burning desire for revenge. The phrase, "Remember Pearl Harbor," became a battle cry that echoed from military camps to factory floors. President Roosevelt and his military advisors knew that the path to victory would be long and costly, but they also knew that America's industrial capacity and manpower far exceeded Japan's. The first significant sign of American retaliation came in April 1942 with the Doolittle Raid. 16 B-25 bombers, led by Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, launched from the aircraft. By 1945, the war that had begun with the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor had spread across every ocean and continent. The United States, once caught off guard and wounded, now stood as the dominant military and industrial power among the Allies. The Pacific Campaign had turned into a relentless advance toward Japan, with each island captured at a terrible cost. Every mile of ocean and every patch of volcanic rock was paid for with blood. The memory of Pearl Harbor still burned in every American heart, driving soldiers, sailors, and airmen forward with a singular determination to end the war, and to make sure nothing like December 7, 1941, could ever happen again. The year began with the invasion of Iwo Jima, a small volcanic island located roughly halfway between the Mariana Islands and Japan. Though only 8 square miles in size, Iwo Jima was of immense strategic importance. From its airfields, Japanese fighters intercepted American bombers heading for Tokyo. Capturing it would give the United States a base for emergency landings and fighter escorts. On February 19, 1945, the first wave of U.S. Marines landed on its black, ash-covered beaches. Waiting for them were 20,000 Japanese soldiers, deeply entrenched in tunnels and bunkers. The ensuing battle became one of the fiercest of the entire war. For 5 weeks, the Marines fought inch by inch, facing hidden machine guns, artillery, and suicide attacks. The Japanese refused to surrender, and many chose to die rather than be captured. The cost was staggering, nearly 7,000 Americans killed and over 20,000 wounded. Almost all of the Japanese defenders perished. Yet the battle produced one of the most iconic images in American history, the raising of the flag on Mount Suribachi, captured by photographer Joe Rosenthal. That single photograph came to symbolize the courage, endurance, and unity of the American fighting spirit, born from the shock of Pearl Harbor and tempered in the fires of war. No sooner had Iwo Jima been secured than the U.S. military turned its attention to Okinawa, the largest of the Ryukyu Islands and the last stepping stone before the Japanese home islands. The battle began in April 1945 and lasted nearly 3 months. Okinawa was hell on earth. Over 100,000 Japanese soldiers defended it, supported by waves of kamikaze pilots who crashed their planes into American ships with suicidal determination. More than 12,000 Americans were killed and 36,000 wounded. The Japanese lost around 100,000 troops, and tens of thousands of civilians died in the crossfire or by forced suicide. The ferocity of the fighting on Okinawa convinced American commanders that an invasion of Japan itself would be catastrophic. Estimates suggested that as many as 1 million Allied soldiers and several million Japanese civilians might die if such an invasion occurred. Meanwhile, a secret project that had begun years earlier under President Roosevelt was nearing completion. Known as the Manhattan Project,